You'd think after winning 6 high-profile cases in court and putting 2 corrupt CEOs behind bars, I'd have earned a little peace and quiet at home. But no, not when you live under an HOA ruled by a woman like Karen. She wasn't just any HOA president. She was the kind who walked around with a measuring tape, a clipboard, and a permanent scowl, convinced she was the last line of defense between civilization and chaos. And unfortunately, she lived right across the street from me. I kept a low profile in the neighborhood. People just knew me as Chris, the guy who always wore suits and drove that fancy old car. Nobody knew I was the county's chief prosecutor or that the car in my garage was a one-of-a-kind 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO, insured for over $1 million, restored to perfection over 5 years, and the last thing my grandfather left me before he passed. That car wasn't just metal and paint. It was legacy. It was family. And I had just gotten it ready for a major exhibition that weekend. I should have known something was up when Karen stopped me near my mailbox one afternoon, her sharp smile already triggering my internal defense system. "You've had that structure in your driveway for months," she said, gesturing toward my closed garage door like it personally offended her. I raised an eyebrow, playing dumb. "My garage?" "No," she snapped, "that display. That museum piece. This isn't a car show lot. It's a residential community, and your thing is violating our aesthetic uniformity code." "Ist daher, Stund." My Ferrari, which hadn't even been outside the garage yet, was violating her aesthetic code? I asked if she'd received complaints. She hadn't. I asked if she was aware the vehicle was stored entirely indoors. She didn't care. She'd seen it once when the garage was open, and that was enough for her to act. That's when I realized she wasn't interested in rules. She was interested in control. I brushed her off politely and went back inside. Big mistake. The next morning, I woke up to a rumbling outside. At first, I thought it was a delivery truck, maybe a neighbor getting a new driveway poured. But when I opened my curtains, I froze. A small construction crew, led by none other than Karen in a neon vest, was standing at the end of my driveway. A flatbed tow truck had backed in, and they were staring directly at my garage. I ran outside barefoot, heart pounding. Karen was waving her clipboard and shouting instructions while 2 men moved toward my garage with crowbars. "Stop!" I yelled, but my voice was drowned out by the hiss of hydraulics as the garage door was pried open. I shoved past the workers and reached the car just in time to see them placing thick straps around it. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, grabbing one of the straps. Karen stepped forward, cool as ever. "Emergency HOA board decision. Vehicle removal for noncompliance. Article 9, Section 12. This is private property." I barked, but she was already filming me with her phone. "Please do not obstruct official HOA action," she said sweetly, then added louder. "He's being aggressive." One of the crew members hesitated, clearly unsure. I tried to explain calmly. "This car is worth more than your house. You touch it, you'll be facing lawsuits that'll make your head spin." Karen just smirked. "Then maybe you should have moved it when I warned you." And just like that, with one careless hand gesture, she ordered them to proceed. My Ferrari, my grandfather's pride and joy, was rolled out of the garage, its undercarriage scraping the driveway, paint chipping as they forced it onto the flatbed. I was so stunned, I didn't even realize I was still filming the whole thing on my phone. The neighborhood had begun to gather, phones out, some whispering, others gasping. Everyone knew Karen was controlling. But this was insane. One neighbor stepped forward to intervene, only to be scolded by Karen for trespassing during an official procedure. The tow truck rumbled to life, taking my Ferrari with it. Karen smiled, turned to the crowd, and said, "Let this be a reminder. Rules are rules." I didn't speak. I didn't shout. I just turned around and walked inside. Because what Karen didn't know, what she never bothered to find out, was who I really was. And I had just finished collecting every single piece of evidence I needed by the time the tow truck disappeared down the street. I had already sent the footage to 3 different contacts, one in the sheriff's office, one in the county's legal affairs division, and another to a friend at the local news station. I wasn't just mad. I was methodical. Years in the courtroom had taught me that emotion doesn't win battles, evidence does. I opened the locked file cabinet in my study and pulled out every document related to the Ferrari: proof of ownership, the $1 million insurance policy, its historic vehicle classification, and most importantly, the deed that clearly showed the garage and driveway as private property exempt from HOA interference under county zoning rules. Karen had just committed grand theft auto, property destruction, and trespassing, all while being filmed. But I wasn't going to knock on her door or scream in the street. That wasn't my style. I let the system do the talking. Within 2 hours, the sheriff himself called me back, his voice tight with disbelief. He was already on his way to the towing company's lot. By sunset, not only had he found the car scratched and improperly stored in an open yard, but he'd also confirmed that Karen had forged a fake emergency order with a phony signature from a non-existent board vote. Her paper trail was already falling apart. Meanwhile, my phone lit up with messages from neighbors. They had seen the video and were furious. Some were scared. Others were inspired. Turns out, Karen had pulled similar stunts before, issuing fines for holiday decorations, demanding the removal of a child's trampoline, even threatening an elderly veteran over a flagpole. Nobody had fought back. Until now. That night, I drafted an emergency injunction and emailed it to the county clerk. By morning, a judge had signed off on a temporary restraining order barring Karen and the HOA from taking any further action on my property. The news picked up the story by noon, complete with a blurry screenshot of Karen in her neon vest, looking way too pleased with herself. Cameras started showing up. Neighbors started speaking out. What Karen thought would be a small power move had exploded into something far bigger. But the real turning point came when I received an anonymous envelope in my mailbox. Inside were HOA board emails, minutes from meetings that never happened, and financial statements that didn't add up. Whoever sent them had access and a conscience. As I poured through the documents, it became clear Karen wasn't just bossy. She was corrupt. Thousands of dollars in landscaping fees had been diverted to a company registered under her cousin's name. HOA dues were being used for spa days and catered luncheons labeled as community outreach. And worst of all, she had signed off on punitive actions against multiple residents, some of them elderly or disabled, without ever notifying them properly. I compiled everything into a formal case file and submitted it directly to the state attorney's office. A day later, I got the call I'd been waiting for. They were launching a full investigation. Karen's smug little kingdom was about to crumble. That evening, just as I stepped outside to get some air, a black SUV pulled into my driveway. Out stepped 2 state investigators, one of them holding a sealed file marked confidential. They didn't stay long, just enough to confirm a few key details, take my sworn statement, and thank me for my cooperation. As they left, I noticed Karen watching from across the street, her arms crossed, eyes narrowed. She must have known something was happening, but not how deep it went. Not yet. That night, my garage felt emptier than usual without the Ferrari. But something about the silence felt powerful, like the calm before a very satisfying storm. The next morning began with a knock on the door, firm, deliberate, and unmistakably official. When I opened it, 2 uniformed officers from the sheriff's department stood on my porch, flanked by a state investigator with a leather briefcase. They were polite but focused, asking if I would accompany them to oversee the retrieval of my vehicle from the impound lot. I agreed without hesitation. By the time we arrived, the lot was already surrounded by caution tape, and 2 flatbeds were standing by. My Ferrari sat near the back, exposed to the elements, with noticeable scratches along the passenger door and a cracked side mirror that hadn't been there before. The insurance representative met us there, shaking his head as he inspected the damage. Photos were taken, statements recorded, and within the hour, the car was loaded, carefully this time, onto the flatbed and brought home. I watched it roll back into my garage like a war hero returning from battle. But the story didn't end with the car's return. That afternoon, the county issued a warrant to search the HOA's main office. Located in the clubhouse Karen had spent thousands renovating without a vote. Investigators walked out with boxes of files, external hard drives, and more than a few questionable receipts. Word spread like wildfire. Neighbors who had never dared question the HOA were now organizing, meeting in driveways, texting one another about what had happened. People who had been silently bullied for years were finally sharing their stories. An elderly couple admitted they'd paid nearly $3,000 in compliance fees just to keep a wheelchair ramp on their front porch. A young mother revealed she was fined weekly because her son's sensory swing wasn't visually harmonious with the neighborhood's vibe. It was shocking how deep Karen's reach had gone and how many people had quietly suffered under it. That evening, while reviewing more documents with the state's legal team, a pattern emerged, one that showed Karen had never been properly elected HOA president in the first place. The previous president had moved out during the pandemic, and Karen simply stepped in, declaring herself interim leader, then quietly changing the bylaws so she couldn't be voted out. The signatures on those documents? Forgeries. Her downfall was now inevitable. The final nail in her coffin came from an unexpected place. A teenage neighbor named Jordan who had been helping maintain the HOA's website. He delivered a flash drive to my door containing years' worth of internal messages and meeting logs, including several where Karen bragged about removing nuisances and teaching lessons to the disobedient. One file in particular made my blood run cold. It was labeled Garage Disputes and detailed a list of properties Karen had targeted for removal of items she found unsightly. Lawn statues, flagpoles, above-ground pools, and yes, my Ferrari. She'd even added notes like, "Owner is too quiet, won't fight back, and target next quarter." It was chilling. I forwarded the entire contents of that flash drive to the Attorney General's office. The media picked up the story within hours. By sunrise, headlines like HOA Tyrant Destroys $1 Million Ferrari and Local Lawyer Uncovers HOA Corruption Ring were circulating online. Karen tried to go silent. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her email auto-replied with a vague message about vacation. But there was no hiding from the wave coming her way. That evening, as dusk settled over the neighborhood, she finally emerged, standing at her doorstep with a trembling voice and a typed statement in her hands. She tried to spin the situation as a misunderstanding, a communication error, even a passion for neighborhood standards. But the crowd that had gathered wasn't buying it. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The evidence was already out there, the law already moving. And for once, Karen didn't have a clipboard to hide behind. The final chapter of Karen's reign fell apart faster than anyone expected. The next morning, news vans lined the cul-de-sac like vultures circling a carcass. Camera crews interviewed neighbors, capturing stories that painted a disturbingly consistent picture of abuse, threats, and manipulation. By midday, Karen was officially served with multiple charges: fraud, misuse of HOA funds, and intentional destruction of private property among them. The sheriff's department escorted her out of her house in front of a stunned audience. Her once pristine yard, now littered with protest signs and chalk messages drawn by neighborhood kids who finally felt safe enough to speak up. As she was placed in the back of the patrol car, the entire block stood silently watching, not with cruelty, but with the kind of quiet relief that only comes after a long storm has passed. That night, the HOA board dissolved itself entirely. A neighborhood vote was held the very next week, and for the first time in years, it actually felt democratic. People who had never attended a meeting before showed up in record numbers. The new board was elected with transparency and overwhelming support, including residents from every age group, background, and even a few who'd once feared stepping forward. They didn't just take office, they took action. The old violation center was converted into a community room where neighbors could get legal advice, home improvement help, and even coffee on Saturdays. My Ferrari was repaired with full insurance coverage, and a restoration shop offered to refinish it at no extra cost, having read the news and wanting to be part of the healing. But for me, the best moment came a few weeks later at a block party hosted right outside my home. It was the first time in years that the neighborhood truly came alive. Music playing, kids laughing, people sharing food and stories without fear of being fined for the height of their lawn chairs. At the center of it all, parked proudly on my driveway, was the Ferrari, polished to a shine, surrounded by people taking pictures not because they were angry, but because they finally understood what it represented. Not just a car, Not just a piece of history, but a symbol of what happens when people stand up for what's right. As the sun set that evening, I was approached by a representative from the State Bar Association who handed me a formal commendation for legal service to the community. I didn't need it, but it felt like closure. A story that had begun with control, destruction, and silence had ended with unity, justice, and voices that could no longer be ignored. And though Karen's house now sat empty, a for sale sign swinging on its perfect lawn, the spirit of the neighborhood had changed for good. A few days later, I received a letter from a law student who'd followed the entire story online. She wrote that she'd been doubting her career path until she read what happened in our neighborhood. "You reminded me why I wanted to practice law," she wrote. "Not for the courtroom wins, but for the people." I pinned that letter on the wall of my study, just above the framed photo of the restored Ferrari. Because in the end, it wasn't just about the car. It was about proving that even in the quietest suburbs, justice still has a place. And sometimes, all it takes is one broken rule to bring the whole house of cards down.